For those of you who are available in part one, this is about the family movement and self-direction. Um, as you may remember, or those that are new, the ARC and our families were involved in virtually the creation of virtually everything dealing with developmental disabilities throughout the country. What I'd like to talk to you about today is um, so families started the first schools for children with disabilities in Ohio way back in the 1950s. As those children grew up, they needed something to do as in the adult world. So by 1967, those families worked with others to create what we now know as the County Boards of Developmental Disabilities. Um, when the County Boards of Developmental Disabilities were created, and remember, they started as schools, uh, the county boards adopted the same school funding formula that we had used for schools. Those of you who have been around for any period of time know that about 25 years ago, the Ohio Supreme Court declared our school funding unconstitutional because it depended on what district you were in, how much money you received in education. Yet we had the same funding formula for our county boards. And it depended on whether you were in Ross County or Cuyahoga County, how much you received. Now I'm going to try to
Go to the share.
go to share.
Yeah.
I'm getting instructions as I do this. Okay. And then I click on this.
Click share. Ask them if they can see it.
Can you all see that? Okay. So here we go. Now, how do I get to the next slide?
See the bottom of the second screen.
Oh, I click on the arrow.
There you go. You good?
Technology is not my thing.
Okay.
So until the early part of this century, if you had an intellectual developmental disability and you lived in the state of Ohio and you went to the newly created county boards of developmental disabilities between 1967 and the early 2000s, almost all of the funding for people with developmental disabilities came from local levy dollars. But by the turn of the century, that sounds terrible. By the turn of the century, and I had mentioned I grew up in the Youngstown area, the economy started crashing. And if you were in Youngstown with the steel mills, if you were in Toledo with the auto industry, if you were in Southern Ohio and shoes were no longer being created in Portsmouth, you didn't have the local levy dollars you once had, and people with developmental disabilities were living longer. So we went to the state and the federal government and said, hey, we need help. Our levy dollars are not what they once were. And a group of us, the ARC, the County Board Association, and the Provider Trade Associations, developed a way to draw down federal dollars. Those are known as home and community-based waiver dollars, and we're going to get into that. But if you're identifying a child or an adult with a developmental disability, the first thing that happens is you go to the county board and ask for help. Medicaid dollars are essentially welfare dollars. So while we promote our levies, there is not necessarily going to be a billboard on I-71 or 70 saying, come in and apply. The system is based on if you've got a need, you'll call us. We won't call you. No one's going to be knocking on the door. Now, we are educating the school system as to what's available, but it begins with you have to call the county board and ask for help. If I did this correctly, this is the first thing that a family will see. Now, this is for adults. It's the Ohio Eligibility Determination Instrument, but there's also an instrument for children up to the age of 16. Number one, a family has to prove that their child became disabled before the age of 22. to be eligible for county board services. This is county services provided with local levy dollars or really anything you get from the developmental disability system. A developmental disability is one that occurs either before birth, during birth, or after birth to the age of 22. So if I'm in an accident the day after I turn 22 and I'm paralyzed from the waist down and I have a significant brain injury, I do not have a developmental disability and I will not qualify for county board services. There are other services I will qualify for through Medicaid, specifically something called the home care waiver. But this is key. So if you're talking to parents of children who want to burn all their reports, don't let them. Uh, an IEP is not enough. Children with learning disabilities, which make up more than half the children in special ed, do not necessarily qualify for DD services. Someone with a label of autism may not qualify. The DD system has something called a functional definition. So I can have Down syndrome, but if I'm driving a car, have a full-time job, can get around the community on my own, I may not qualify for County Board of DD services, even though I have the label of Down syndrome. Um, it's a real challenge for many of our families that had spent 21 years in the public school system accepting the fact that their child had a disability and then realize they don't have a developmental disability or they don't function like a stereotypical person with Down syndrome from 1967. It's really one of those challenges that our family go through. So first thing is you have to ask for help, and that's to get local funding or access to county board services. The next thing is to access Medicaid waiver services. And I think I touched on it a little bit in part one. A Medicaid waiver, and they're all called home and community-based waivers, exist to prevent someone from having to go into an institutional setting. So remember, every county has local levy dollars that they can spend, but there's no entitlement to those dollars unless I qualify. And even if I qualify by the last slide, the county board has the legal authority to put me on a waiting list for local dollars. So I may go through the whole process and find out either my county, because of poverty in that county, doesn't have the money, or they may not have the services that I need. So I always advise our advocates, talk about what your child actually needs. If I need a job, maybe I'm knocking on the wrong door. We have a department called Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, who is charged with getting Ohioans with disabilities, the big D, jobs. So maybe that's the door I knock on. If my child has significant medical needs, the door I knock on is Medicaid's door. Yeah, we're good. And their waiver is administered mostly, this is going to be odd, through the area agencies on aging. So if I was in this car accident at the day after my 22nd birthday and I've got a lot of physical and medical needs, you call your area agency on aging. Even though I'm 22 in one day, my needs are medical and I don't meet the definition of developmental disabilities. But if I've gotten my foot in the door and I need help, every county board has a needs assessment that they administer. And by state law, they have to do this. This was updated on October 10th, 2024. I give this to the families so they can practice, But this is not something you hand to the county board. This is something so that you know, as an advocate or a family, what's going to be expected. Getting services in the DD system is based on what I can't do and don't have. And again, that's a challenge for our families. We've spent an entire 2 decades talking about the positive. Let's build on the positive. You don't get in the DD door by talking about the positive. You have to talk about the negative of what your child cannot do. That's going to take some retraining for most of our families. Um, it's not a long document, it's only 10 pages. The SSA, Service and Support Administrator, in the county board is the one that administers it, and they've had training on how to do this. But the last page is, do they have a need? Do they have an unmet need? If I'm graduating from high school, my primary need is going to be something to do during the day. Um, and our county boards have a long history of providing adult day services. Something to keep in mind, and something I train families on, is if I'm just getting county board services and not a waiver, that's 100% local levy dollars. If I've been determined eligible for a Medicaid waiver, it's typically 40% county dollars and 60% federal dollars. So there's an incentive once I leave high school for a county board that would typically have provided me some day service to put me on a waiver, because now they only have to pay 40% of the costs. So, but the family has to demonstrate a need. Um, and you'll see this is the first page. Do I live alone? Do I live with family? Do I live with others? The county board has the right to assume, even if I'm 25 and I live with my family is going to provide free support. And if my need is met with free support, maybe I don't need anyone else. It's also a challenge for the family. You know, you don't have a legal responsibility to do anything for your child beyond the age of 18, but you have a moral responsibility. And unless the family says, no, I can't do it, your needs are being met. So you're going to have copies of this. Go through it. These are not complex forms. It's a yes or no. Every family has a right to see the assessment form. So tell your families, ask for the assessment form. Make sure that the questions are answered correctly. One of the challenges we've had for this, and it's evolved over the years, is our senior citizens' parents are the last ones to ask for help. You know, and they're often the ones that need the help the most, but they grasp that waivers are a program of Medicaid. And part of a waiver is becoming eligible for Medicaid. And to be eligible, you got to visit the welfare office. And our senior citizens, especially, will not go to Job and Family Services, nor will they ask for help. But the form talks about, okay, I live with my parents, but maybe my parents are not physically or emotionally able to provide the support. A county board has the right to say, if I say I can't do this anymore because I was just diagnosed with breast cancer and I can't do it, the county board has the right to say, get me a doctor statement that says you can't do it anymore. Um, Many families see that as an invasion of privacy. It is what it is. The county has a right to ask those kind of questions, and often you have to be able to prove that you can't do it anymore to provide free support. That'll come into play often of I've got a child who, and remember, waivers are available birth to death. Our waivers don't have an age range, but I may have a child with autism who is a runner, who will elope. The county board has the right to say, and a hearing officer later on has the right to say, well, sure, they run, but why haven't they gotten hurt? Well, because I chased them. Okay, you're there and you've chased them and you've protected them from harm. You met the need, and you met the need without payment. So this document is really critically important to families. I suggest you pull it up later and look through it. Remember, have the family make sure it's answered correctly. Um, and the middle section doesn't about it can't be a mental health challenge either. So if mental illness is my predominant disability, I may not qualify. Um, Many of you, I think a few of you work with Ohio Rise, that is now supporting children with behavioral health or mental health needs. I'm on that board for Ohio Rise, and we've determined that at least a third of the children now being served through Ohio Rise also have a developmental disability. So you can have both, but if your predominant disability is mental illness, you may or may not qualify for DD services. So it's challenging. The other thing and a bit of advice on the needs assessment is many of our families, especially families of children with physical disabilities, will go to the county board and say, my child needs physical therapy. Well, the county boards don't do physical therapy. Your Medicaid card pays for physical therapy. And even though I need physical therapy, the county cannot give you a waiver so that you become eligible for Medicaid. I hope that, let me go back. So waivers are a Medicaid program. Most of our children who live in middle income families do not qualify for Medicaid because Medicaid, if your child looks at the entire family income and assets. But, and this is a big but, if the county or the state offers a minor child a waiver, Medicaid will only look at the child's income and assets. Therefore, they will qualify for the waiver and for Medicaid at the same time. So many of our parents understand that, but they ask for things covered under Medicaid, and the county can't give you a waiver to get Medicaid. But if you get a waiver because you need support in activities of daily living, like getting up, getting dressed, or you have a behavior issues like elopement, or you need a day program, they can give you a waiver and then you also get Medicaid, which pays for your therapies. That make, hope that makes sense. It is a complex system, to say the least, but it all begins with that I need help. So the next qualifier, you've gone through the needs assessment and the county has determined, yes, you have a need. We can't meet the need with local funds. You're going to need a waiver to meet those needs, and it's going to help the county because we can draw down 60% in federal funds. The county must also do a level of care assessment. So if I've got Down syndrome, I can prove that I had Down syndrome at birth before the age of 22. I now have to prove that I function at a developmental disability level of care. So in Ohio, there are two primary levels of care. Nursing level of care, which would qualify me for the home care waiver, or if I'm an older person, the passport waiver, which is because of my medical needs. If I have Down syndrome, autism, more often than not, cerebral palsy, I'm going to have to meet a developmental disability level of care. This is in addition to qualifying for county board services. This is to qualify for the waiver. And nursing level of care and developmental disability level of care are not interchangeable. Um, so if you've got a child, and I think most of us are serving children that are in the hospital and they need to leave, chances are the home care waiver may be a better way to get you out of the hospital because it can provide nursing and some medical issues and home health care aids on the home. And I'm sorry if I'm going back and forth, it is confusing. The major difference in practicality is that on the home care waiver, if I stop having a medical need, I stop meeting that level of care and I no longer get the home care waiver. On a developmental disability level of care, if I function like someone with Down syndrome in 1967, chances are I'm going to continue to function that way for the rest of my life. So, as a result, in practical terms, there is no waiting list for the home care waiver. People come and go. On a developmental disability waiver, there's often a waiting list because the chances are very good. If I get a waiver, I'm on that for the rest of my life because I may learn, hopefully, I will learn new skills, but I'm always going to have cerebral palsy. I'm always going to have Down syndrome. I'm always going to need support. The county and the state has an obligation to do regular levels of care on folks to make sure that they still function. And we use a functional definition in Ohio. I continue to function often, and many of these rules are written of what someone with Down syndrome was like in 1967. You know, it's been modified. Um, the other qualifier to maintain eligibility on these waivers is that I maintain eligibility for Medicaid, which often is not only do I have to have a developmental disability or a big disability, the big D, I also have to meet financial eligibility. So I win the lottery tomorrow and I have more than $2,000 to my name, I lose Medicaid. And if I lose Medicaid, I lose my waiver. You know, it's all these things for families to keep in mind. So I have to always function like a stereotypical person with a disability, and I have to meet the financial eligibility. We have about 300 people every year in Ohio who are threatened with the loss of their waiver because they're not using it. They get on the waiver and all they do is use their Medicaid card for therapies. If you stop using your waiver, and you don't have to use it every day, but if you stop using your waiver for activities of day living, a day service, the state and federal government can assume you didn't need it. If you're not using it, you didn't need it. Therefore, why are we holding it when someone else would need it? Um, so once people get on, make sure they use it. Um, and it's for the waivers are more quality of life, and the Medicaid card is your health insurance. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Okay, so Ohio has a number of waivers. These are the waivers that are available specifically for people with traditional developmental disabilities. Um, I put the home care waiver on there so you know what that provides. Once a parent gets their child through the front door, they don't get to decide which waiver they get. The county board, based on the needs assessment, can determine, first of all, can we serve you with local dollars? Can we find someone else to provide support for you? But if you have a waiver, if you're offered a waiver, the county gets to decide what waiver that is that best meets your needs. The home care waiver on the far right is administered by the Area Agency on Aging. You'll see that. The level one individual options and self waiver are administered by the county boards. So if you've gone through all of those steps and the county board says, okay, Gary, we're going to give you a level one waiver. I'm not sure you can see it at the top. If it's a child, it's about a $41,000 budget. If it's an adult out of school, it's about a $62,000 annual budget. It's somewhat like a voucher. It doesn't go, so if I only use 30,000 an adult this year, that doesn't mean I got 90,000 next year. It's an annual budget that goes, it's called a waiver span. So if I get on the waiver in February, it goes to the next January 31st. The county board has the needs assessment, and then they develop what's called an individual service plan. They sit down with the family, and they don't often say, okay, you're a child, you have a $41,000 budget, let's decide how to spend it. I may not have access to the entire 41,000 if my needs can be met with 20. So this is also an opportunity to talk to the families about, okay, what do you need? What can you provide for free? Where do you need support? Underneath the level one waiver and the level one waiver, the IO and the self are very much similar in the services they provide, but this is a list of billing codes. And the family's obligation is to say what they need. So if my kid is out of school, I need adult day supports. The SSA, the case manager, helps me decide what best, but it doesn't mean I have to use adult day supports. So if I'm out of school and I decide, hey, I don't want to go to a day program, I just need support in the home and the community, the next billing code and the most often used is something called homemaker personal care. Homemaker personal care is that certified independent provider or agency that does activities of daily living in my home and in the community. So if I have autism and my greatest need is to learn how to socialize in the community, maybe my homemaker personal care provider is someone taking me out to the movies, taking me to Cedar Point, not necessarily for recreation, but my ISP, my individual service plan, says Gary's greatest need is to learn how to socialize in the community. He does that by getting out in the community and learning how to interact appropriately. Many of us in this field think of that as therapeutic. It's just practical experience. But that same person, that same staff person could be teaching me how to take a shower, cooking my meals for me, taking me grocery shopping. It's a very broad billing code. So you're not going to see something called horseback riding therapy. But if a horseback riding therapy program gets certified under the Homemaker Personal Care Billing Code, and it's determined by the team, Gary could really learn a lot of skills learning how to ride a horse. I can choose that horseback riding therapy program, not as a therapy, but as a homemaker personal care service. There's one in Stark County called Pegasus Farms that does this. They also were certified as an adult day service provider. So your county is going to be very flexible for the most part, as long as it fits within these things. You'll see home delivered meals in that. That's not just, I don't want to cook. It's, I could live independently, but because I can't cook and waivers are to keep me healthy and safe, you know, if a company certified by the state is going to be delivering these meals to me, and that's going to allow me to be living fairly independently, then okay, have at it. Or maybe have a gluten-free diet. But the people I live with, my family, are not gluten-free. You know, it can be even a kosher diet. It can be it can't be, I don't want to cook.
Excuse me,
So,
Gary.
yeah,
Gary,
go
I'm
ahead.
so sorry
No,
to interrupt you. Because the information is so helpful, but we also want to get to the case presentation. Are we
yes.
able to wrap yours
Oh,
up and then make sure we
absolutely.
share the
Yeah,
slides with everybody? Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. So, and again, it's services can be provided by an agency or an independent provider. Once your child turns 18, you can be certified or to provide services or work for an agency. If your child is under 18, there are a bunch of other hoops that you could jump through. And parents of minor children now in Ohio since January can also be employed by an agency. Um, Here's my information. Please call. Uh, we're the lead advocate for people with developmental disabilities in Ohio. Um, we do this kind of training on a face-to-face basis on a regular basis. So just let us know. We'll come out, we'll talk to you. Or if you just want to call and say, hey, I don't understand this, we're available.